Have you ever paused to wonder what's really happening when we follow a spiritual teacher? Maybe not just on the surface level, but deeper, beneath the teachings, the admiration, and even the idea that this person has something we don't.
Like, why are you trying to ruin the one thing that gives me hope?
It's not something we usually question because the idea of a teacher is comforting. It's safe to believe someone has figured it out, and if we just listen, we might figure it out too. But what if, without even realizing it, the act of following a teacher might be keeping us from the freedom we are looking for? Not because they are bad people or intentionally misleading us, but because of the nature of how this whole dynamic works. The duality of a teacher and the student, and the stories we create about both. My name is Liv Kisper. I am an author on non-duality and a transpersonal guide with a master's degree in transpersonal psychology and consciousness studies, and I've spent the past 2 decades in intense spiritual search and self-development until I became completely disillusioned by it. In this channel, Live Unbound, I offer grounded perspective on personal liberation as available for anyone with an open mind and readiness if clarity is more important than some mystic puzzles or religious superstition. And let's start with the teachers themselves. Someone like Eckhart Tolle, for example, tells a story that resonates deeply with so many people. He describes how one day, in the depths of despair, something shifted. He saw through his suffering, and from that point on, he was free and happy forever. It's inspiring because it offers a kind of hope. Maybe there is a way to step out of all of that confusion and to find some permanent peace. And it sounds great, but it's also the ego's ultimate game plan to find this permanent, different, better experience in the future. And so here is the question that's worth asking. When somebody's really experiencing this shift and becomes center of attention for millions of people, what happens when they are not just living their life anymore, but stepping into the role of a teacher? It's easy to see how this can create a new kind of identity, one that's tied to being the one who knows, the one who's free, and even the one people admire.
Yeah, but the story inspired me. Are you telling me that inspiration is bad now?
And I want to be clear on this. This isn't about questioning someone's intentions or authenticity. It's about noticing how even the idea of being a teacher or following one creates a dynamic where liberation starts to look like something you get from somebody else. And that idea that freedom is something outside of you, something distant, that you need to do something to get there, might be the very thing keeping you from seeing that it's already here, disguised in plain sight. And this doesn't just happen with teachers. It's something we do in so many different ways. We build identities around our roles, the successful one, the good parent, or even the spiritual seeker.
Right, but my identity is totally fine. It's not like I'm over here obsessing about being spiritual or anything. Yeah.
These identities are not easy to spot because they are protecting the self-image closely linked to the symbolic survival. They hide behind labels like me, mine, and I, and it is always the self-identity that is holding us back in living freely and doing what we actually want to do. But they give us this sense of purpose, control, and meaning, and they also create a kind of a pressure. The pressure to maintain the image, to stay consistent, to never let the cracks show.
Yeah, it's called responsibility. There is just too many people who are relying on me to keep it together.
Now imagine what it's like for someone who steps into the role of a spiritual teacher. The people they teach look to them not just for answers, but for certainty, a sense of grounding in an uncertain world. Over time, the identity of the teacher becomes deeply woven into their reality, reinforced not only to to this devotion of the followers, but by structure of their new life. Many of the struggles that cause pain for most people, like financial insecurity, loneliness, lack of purpose, can be erased simply by stepping into this persona. Money flows, eliminating the stress of survival, or community forms around them, offering unwavering support and connection. Admirers amplify the sense of significance and attributing wisdom and power to their every word. Even their access to opportunities, relationships, travel, influence, it expands, and the teacher becomes someone whose reality is shaped not by grind of daily life, but by the identity itself, which provides, this security what most people are actually searching for. It's not about good or bad. It's about how stepping into this role, like this, transformed landscape of one's life in ways that few stop to question. And yet, the truth of being human is messy. It's full of doubts, contradictions, and emotions that don't really fit neatly into the story of awakening. And that's not a failure, it's just what life is. But when we don't make space for that reality, when we create roles like the teacher, the enlightened one, something gets lost. And for those of us who follow these teachers, it's worth reflecting on what we are looking for in them. Is it in their wisdom, their clarity, their ability to point us back to ourselves? Or is it something more subtle, a belief that they have something we don't, that they are somehow special, that their life is free of the struggles and insecurities that we are still trying to escape? There is no shame in wanting to learn from somebody who seems to have found peace. But what happens when we start to believe that peace is tied to their story, to their specific experience? What if the following someone else's path, we are unintentionally avoiding our own?
I just want someone to tell me what to do so I can stop screwing it up.
This isn't about rejecting teachers altogether. It's about seeing them clearly, not as perfect beings, but as people who, like us, have their own layers of identity, stories, and challenges. It's about questioning whether the act of putting someone on a pedestal is reinforcing the very separation we are trying to dissolve. And it's not just about them, it's about us too. Who is it that feels drawn to a teacher? Who is it that believes that needs someone else to show them the way? These aren't easy questions to sit with, but they are the kind of questions that can open up something very unexpected.
You clearly don't know my teacher, and you have never met an enlightened being.
What if liberation isn't about getting rid of our stories, our conditioning, or even our insecurities?
I already asked these questions, and I got answers so profound that you would not understand.
What if it's about seeing them clearly as they are and recognizing that none of it, none the struggle, not the freedom, is separate from the whole and it doesn't belong to anybody particular, even though, of course, it appears very strongly so? And what if the very act of seeking, whether it's form of a teacher, a practice, or a particular moment of awakening, is part of what keeps us from noticing that this right here is already enough? These aren't questions with easy answers, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the real freedom isn't in finding the perfect teacher or the perfect path, but in seeing through the idea that you are missing anything at all. So, if liberation isn't something we can get from someone else, then what is it? Well, this is where things get tricky because the mind wants the answer, a step by step guide, a new practice, or some kind of guarantee. But freedom isn't something you can package like that. It's not something you can just achieve. And it's certainly not something anyone else can give you. It's about seeing what's already here, even if it's messy, especially when it's messy, because the truth is no teacher, no teaching, no practice can actually give you what you're looking for. What they can do, if they are honest and grounded, is point you back to the one place you don't want to look, your own direct experience and recognition, which is not easy because to see the truth, you have to lose a piece of that identity that believes that it's protecting us, that it's keeping us safe, or it's keeping itself safe. But here is where the paradox shows up. Even as we start to question the role of the teacher, it's tempting to turn that questioning into another identity. I am the one who doesn't follow teachers. I've figured it out on my own. See how subtle it is? Even in rejecting one identity, it quickly builds another. So the real question becomes, who is it that feels drawn to these roles? Who is it that feels incomplete without a teacher, or who feels superior for not needing one? And what happens when we start to really look at that instead of running to the next practice and next insight?
Great. So I'll just sit here with my dysfunctions and call it liberation.
It's uncomfortable because the part that feels incomplete, that feels like it needs something, doesn't want to be seen. It would rather hide behind the next belief, the next teacher, or even the next moment of supposed liberation. Because what if we didn't turn away from that discomfort? What if we stayed with it, not to fix it, just to see clear it, just to see it clearly? The thing about identity, whether it's the identity of the seeker, the teacher, the good wife, or anything else, is that it's built on a story. A story about who we are, what we need, and what will finally make us whole. And that includes the story of the teacher. It's not about rejecting the role of a teacher or the idea of learning from someone who has insight to share. It's about recognizing that no teacher can give you what you already are. And no teacher, no matter how wise or enlightened they seem, is free from the same human stories and struggles that we all experience.
Excuse me, my teacher hasn't struggled since 1998.
And this isn't a criticism of teachers or teachings, it's an invitation to see them as they are, not as perfect or infallible, but as tools for exploration. And just like any tool, they have their limits. A teacher can point you to the door, but they can't walk through it for you.
Fine, but can they at least keep the door open for me so I can think about it?
And if you spend too much time worshipping the teacher, you might never notice that the door was open all along. So, where does this leave us? It leaves us with a mirror, a chance to look at what we've been avoiding all along. If freedom isn't something anyone else can give us, if freedom is not something we can achieve, then what are we left with? We're left with the uncomfortable, unfiltered truth of this moment, of this life, exactly as it is. And here is the thing, the mind hates that answer. It hates the simplicity of it because it means there is nowhere left to run, no teacher to chase, no practice to master, no future moment where everything will finally be okay. The mind wants movement, progress, something to do. Freedom, on the other hand, is like stillness. It's the unexpected recognition that nothing needs to be fixed because nothing was ever broken.
Have you met my brain?
So, who is it that feels the need for a teacher? Who is it that feels incomplete without someone else to guide the way? That's the uncomfortable part of this inquiry because it forces us to look directly at the part of us that's clinging to certainty, to validation, to the idea that someone else has the answers that we don't. And of course, your teacher feels like the exception. That's the nature of attachment. It convinces you that your story is the one that's different, the one that doesn't fit this larger pattern. But the invitation here isn't to reject your teacher, it's to question the story you've created around them. Are they really the source of your freedom? Or are they just another character in the dream of separation?
Like, why are you trying to ruin the one thing that gives me hope?
If our hope is rooted in the idea that freedom is somewhere out there, we'll spend our lives chasing it and never arriving. But if we are willing to question that story, even if it feels uncomfortable, something unexpected might happen. And this doesn't mean rejecting teachers, it means seeing them for what they really are, reflections. They can't give you anything you don't already have. And at their best, they simply remind you of the truth you've been avoiding, but they can't walk the path for you. And here is where the self identity starts to squirm. Freedom isn't found in rejecting anything, not teachers, not practices, not even self identities. It's found in seeing through them. So, what happens when we stop chasing, when we stop looking for freedom in someone else's story and start looking at the one we are telling ourselves? The self identity doesn't like that question. So, let's end with a few questions, not answers, because answers would just be more stories, but questions that invite you to look for yourself. What would you need to confront in you if you stopped looking for freedom in someone else's words or stories? And who is it that feels incomplete without a teacher? And in a completely different universe where the roles are reversed and your teacher becomes your student, what would you teach them? Maybe personal liberation is not a one-time event after years of diligent practice, bringing permanent escape by some special state as portrayed by some popular teachings. These hyper-convincing fairy tales are only meant to keep you in feeling inferior to others, obscuring the true freedom available to you now. So going beyond the illusions of duality means directly questioning the stories and embodying liberation as an introspective lifestyle. And this is not reserved for a few special ones, but for anyone with an open mind. You can join my channel where I offer a grounded perspective on personal liberation